biggest achievement of the night, honestly. I so stress about that stuff when you have issues with speakers and the rest of it. So fantastic, fantastic. All
Well, we can
right.
kick off now because it's on the half hour, 5:30 Australian Eastern Daylight Saving Time, I think it was advertised at. So we said a lot of different times we're coming to you from, including Paul, which I think is in 7:30 in his evening over in New Zealand. So thank you everyone for joining us. I'm Jared from Pacific. I'm in Brisbane. The cyclone hasn't hit us yet. It's still probably 24 to 36 hours away. So that was good. I was a bit worried that I was going to be doing this without a roof above me. So we're on a session about mental fitness by Dr. Paul Wood. And so I'll just give you a little bit of an introduction and then I'll be handing over to Paul just to outline the agenda. After this welcome and introduction, Paul's going to present up into, again, the Australian Eastern Daylight Saving Time, 6:10 or 10 past on the hour. Then while Paul goes through all your questions you put in the Q&A in the chat and picks out the ones he can respond to in the time he's got, I'll give you a little update on all the exciting new things about Matific that are out now and coming this month and throughout the year. And then we'll come back for Paul to answer the questions. And at the end, we've got some interesting information for you about some competitions and special offers. It was my great privilege to meet Paul last November at Hemner Springs, which if you've never been there is worth visiting, as is most of New Zealand, really, isn't it? Beautiful spot, couple of hours perhaps north west of Christchurch, an alpine type resort town where the principals from the Canterbury Primary Principal Association had a retreat, and Dr. Paul Wood was one of the presenters. And I went over and straight away picked up Paul's books and started looking at, thinking this looked very interesting, and decided to buy those to bring back with me from Australia. And I've read both of those. We'll talk more about them at the end. But Paul ran a great session. I thought, wouldn't it be great to get him on one of our webinars to expose him to a wider audience and expose you to what he has to offer. So I will stop sharing my screen at this point and come back to letting Paul take over. And then I'm getting this again. We will then resume after Paul's had his presentation. So I've just got to get that.
Well, look at that Photoshop
There
photo.
we
Look at that.
are.
I clearly need to update this. I do apologize. You're looking at that fantastically Photoshop photo, and then you see this mug in front of you. But hey, look, seriously, what an absolute pleasure to have the opportunity to be talking to you tonight. Uh, Educators are people who change people's lives in a way that just most occupations don't. And I certainly know that because education transformed my experience of life from where I was in dark places to where I am now. I'll talk more about that, but I really wanted to acknowledge you and the value of what you do. And I think there's a few things that make education a unique challenge. One of them is you won't see the seeds you sow now always come to fruition. When I think about some of the educators who positively influenced me in my life, some of them influenced me at primary school. And those seeds that were sown there, they just lay on infertile ground until years later, when I was ready to really embrace who I could be as a person. And the people who sowed those seeds, they never got to see that. So I want to acknowledge that you, in every small interaction you have the potential to have a massive positive impact on people, but you won't always get the satisfaction of seeing that outcome. It will be something that occurs at a different point in time. And that's such an amazing responsibility and opportunity to have that impact, but also it makes it harder in terms of the ability to persevere and carry on. I think another thing that makes teaching particularly problematic or difficult in terms of the stresses involved with it is that you've got eyes on you all the time. Most people, even in high stress roles, get the opportunity for a bit of downtime, a bit of a break, a bit of slacking off, a bit of relaxation here and there in between all the insanity of the stress. But when you've got eyes on you all the time, that is such a different environment. the smallest differences in you having a better or a worse day are noticed. You have to be bringing your A game all the time. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. I wanted to acknowledge what you do and the value of it, but also the inevitable challenges associated with it. And I think that's important. Um, I'm a doctor of psychology, and I didn't always connect with education. It didn't always resonate with me. But as I said earlier, it's changed my life. I'll talk more about that soon. But I just want to pick up on the idea of stress and stress in your roles. One of the most unhelpful things that we get told in modern society is that stress is inherently negative. And we get messages around this all the time. Oh, no, I'm stressed. Oh, the stress. Oh, don't be stressed. But the reality is, from a psychological point of view, stress is not inherently negative. Stress in psychology is anything that places a demand on you. Anything that consumes your mental and emotional energy is by definition stress. And sure, that's some of the stuff you want to avoid, but it is also the best, most meaningful stuff in your life. The most meaningful, satisfying stuff in your life won't come without a mental and emotional demand. And that stress, that is a challenge to be embraced, not a threat to be avoided. That means you've signed up to do something meaningful with your time, as all of you have. However, the challenge there is that if we experience too much of that stress without opportunity for recovery, that's often when we start to get into difficulty, into trouble. And it's really important for managing stress that we're well hydrated. So, excuse me. Okay, team. I'm going to get you to use the chat feed. I've got a bit of a question for you, right? So warm up your digits. I know some of you have already been doing it. Warm up your digits. Get ready to set that keyboard on fire because I got a great question for you. I know educators love a good question, eh? Here we go. Here we go. How heavy do you think that glass of water is? What's your guess? How heavy is this glass of water? Let's see it in the chat feed. What are your guesses? Let's go, chat feed. Look at this. Oh, who was that? Who was that back there? Hang on, I've got to go back. I've got to go back. Who was that? I'm losing it. There's too many answers coming in. Oh, I'll tell you what. I'll tell you what. Hey, go, team, go. You're just setting the keyboard on fire. There's so many good answers. What I would say is some of you got that this was a trick question, eh? Because what I was hoping you would do, I was hoping the big brains in the room would start guessing the weight of it. How many grams is it? Right? How many mils? And what does that equate in grams? However, I didn't ask you how heavy the glass is. I asked you, how much it weighs. I asked you how heavy it was. And in terms of how heavy it is, how much it weighs is a really important variable. But as a number of people accurately guessed, it depends on how long I've been holding it. Because the heaviness is really a subjective thing. So how strong is my arm? How much water is in there? And how long have I been holding it? Now, I've only been holding this for about, 20 seconds or so. And what that means is I can feel the demand it places on my shoulder. Remember that word, demand? I can feel the stress of holding this out, but I haven't been experiencing that for too long. So I've still got all this discretionary energy left over to bring my most values driven, compassionate, A game version of myself. To give you an example, this version at the moment, this is the version when my kids who don't want to go to bed and demonstrate non-compliance, they're 7 and 10. This is the version of me who goes, shame. That is for you South Africans. Shame. They just don't want to miss out on life. They're just too excited by it. But I'll tell you this right now, if I've been holding this out for days or weeks, the weight hasn't changed, but you better believe how heavy it is for me has changed. And if I've been under stress and pressure without recovery, without break, like holding this out for days or weeks, you don't have any discretionary energy left over for anything else but the stress you're trying to deal with. And I tell you this right now, I'm not reframing my kids not wanting to go to bed in such a positive way if I've been under prolonged stress and pressure. In fact, you won't find this relatable at all because you're better people than me. But one of the things I notice about myself is some of the politeness slips from my personal relationships when I've been under prolonged stress and pressure. So here's a message I want to leave you with from tonight. You know, from tonight, this morning, wherever you are, the work you do is important. It matters. And for that reason, it's going to have a demand associated with it. It's going to have stress. Nothing that truly matters in life comes without a cost. And that stress, that is a challenge to be embraced, not a threat to be avoided. But that will only be true if you are deliberate and disciplined about putting the water down, about putting the glass down, so that you have the opportunity to recover, so that the next time you pick it back up, it's not too heavy for you. And so putting the glass down lets you recover, but also if you put it down at the right time, guess what happens to your shoulder? Your shoulder grows stronger. One of the things we know from the research is this: you don't get more resilient and mentally tough, more mentally fit from avoiding stress and pressure. The opposite. You get more resilient from experiencing the right levels of stress and pressure and then having the opportunity to recover and bounce back from them. And most of the time in modern life, the issues we have around stress are not because, sorry, that was my 7-year-old quickly popping in the room. I hope that was a distraction for you. So the issue we have is not that it's the volume or the weight of the stress and pressure, but instead the duration to which we're exposed to it without break, without relent. So the challenge I put to you is to put that glass down. Now, I'll try and talk to you about some of the techniques that you can use in our time together tonight, but I have limited time. One of the ones that I think is incredibly useful to know is one that you can also employ to give yourself little micro breaks in between sessions in your classes, in between being in one physical location to another, in between leaving your car and walking in your front door or your train or whatever it is for you. It's a really simple, small way to put it down. And I think that's more important for you than other people sometimes, because again, you've got those eyes on you all the time. It's so important to be able to do these micro breaks. So what I want to introduce you to is something called the physiological sigh. And the physiological sigh is a breathing technique that triggers a calm response in your central nervous system by bringing in additional oxygen, expelling additional carbon dioxide, and lowering your heart rate. And the way you do a physiological sigh is you inflate your lungs through your nose, take a couple of breaths, and then you do a prolonged, extended exhale through your mouth. This is the important thing for triggering the calm response in your central nervous system. The exhale needs to be longer than the inhale, but it's a nice, simple technique you can start practicing. They use this in elite sports and the special forces. It really does work. And it's actually something they discovered because people do it naturally. About every 3 to 5 minutes, most people will do it. And it's just a way of your body recalibrating in terms of your lungs, reinflating the air sacs to bring in more oxygen, expel more carbon dioxide. But also people do this naturally in claustrophobic situations to self-soothe. It's just something we've evolved for. And so this is what it looks like. You go, all right, everyone with me, all right. Now, most people, if they do this 2 or 3 times, will notice an increased sense of calm. It's a really good way to just briefly put down that glass, but also check this out. In psychology, we often say the difference between a reaction and a response is 3 seconds. A reaction is just that automatic emotional thing, you know, that we want to give into, whereas a response is something we choose in a situation. And if we can just give ourselves that little 3-second gap, then it's way easier to choose how we respond rather than just react. The physiological sigh, it's giving you that gap. Also, by the way, you don't need to do it as dramatically as that. If you do it that dramatically in your class or at home, people might look at you. You can actually do it subtly, okay? I was just doing that to illustrate. All right, Tate. So stress is not a threat to be avoided. It is a challenge to be embraced. It's a sign you're doing something meaningful, but that will only be true if you are deliberate and disciplined about putting that glass down. Hey, one of the things that Jared's going to send out to you at the end of this as well, and will be on the last slide potentially, and that is a link to the online mental fitness course where I deliver all of this stuff, and you'll get a discount code if you want to jump on there. I've only got limited time today, but I will try and maximize that value. And here's another thing that it's incredibly useful for you to know that will reduce the likelihood that you'll have negative health outcomes associated with stress. And that's to know this, that we evolve to experience stress. As I said before, it's not a threat to be avoided, it is a challenge to be embraced. When we only think that stress is a negative thing, we are more likely to experience a greater level of activation in our central nervous system, and our amygdala will release more cortisol, things like that, which when they linger, result in negative health outcomes. When we realize that stress has a function and a purpose, and that it's an evolutionary adaptation, then we are way more likely to be able to benefit from what it offers us and reduce the negative health outcomes. And by the way, I just want to say this, I use an evolutionary lens to understand human behavior and where we are today. It's not the only way of understanding the world or people or existence, but it's just the particular framework and lens that I use to understand the world. And if we think of it in that way, why did we evolve to experience stress? Cortisol, adrenaline, give us energy, give us focus, prepare us for action. I want you to think about that. We evolved to experience stress because it prepares us to take on challenges. It prepares us to do hard things that matter for our survival and for our well-being. In psychology, this is called the stress is enhancing mindset. And just knowing that this is the purpose of stress makes it less likely that you will have negative health outcomes as a result. But I'll tell you this right now, I certainly didn't always know all this stuff, and I didn't always have a useful idea around stress, unpleasant emotions, or anything like that. That's something I've come to later in life. When I was growing up, I thought that I should be able to handle whatever came my way. I should be able to hold up a 44-gallon drum, a bucket like this, no matter how long, with no impact whatsoever, and that I shouldn't feel any emotions I'd associate with vulnerability or weakness. And as a result, when I started to experience those oh so human emotions, I didn't have the tools or the capacity to cope with them. And as a result of that, I sought solace in drug use, drug and alcohol use. From about the age of 12 onwards, I was regularly getting blackout drunk. I was doing drugs on a regular basis. And part of that was self-medicating to try and cope with my experience. Another part of it was just that was what other people of my age and my peer group did in my neighborhood. People often don't realize just how impacted we are by the environment we're in, by the social norms and expectations. But we really only know what we know in life. And I never even could have imagined a life as good as my life is now when I was a kid, because I had never seen a life as good as my life now. And that required me to change some of the unhelpful thoughts and beliefs that I developed growing up. And ironically, it wasn't until I ended up in prison that I was actually able to break free of these mental prisons. You know, I grew up, I went off the rails. By the way, saying I went off the rails is important because I was lucky enough to grow up with parents who were good people, who were contributing tax-paying members of society, and who had laid down rails for me. But when I hit those adolescent years, I went off those rails. I was far more influenced by my peer group. And also as well, you know, I was robbed of the ability to make good decisions for myself through drug and alcohol use. Not that teenagers, and particularly teenage males, make good decisions in general anyway, but even less so under those circumstances. And one of the things that was causing me a lot of distress was that my mum, who was the one soft person in my life, was in the process of dying. And it wasn't an environment where you got given information around that. So there was a lot of uncertainty. And I certainly didn't have the tools or the permission really to go and actually seek information around that. So my mum's illness, she was terminally ill, was like a shadow on the edge of my vision that was just lurking there, and it was causing me distress, and I couldn't cope with it. I didn't think I was supposed to feel that stuff, and I got further and further into alcohol and drug use. By the time I was 18, my mum died, and she had lived significantly longer than expected, but I hadn't made the most of that. You know, to my enduring regret and shame, you know, when my mum was busy dying and my other brothers were there spending time with her, I was withdrawn. I couldn't deal with it. I couldn't handle it. I didn't have the tools. So I stayed away. I just tried to get high and drunk all the time so I didn't have to deal with it. And then 3 days after she died, I chose to catch up with a drug dealer. What I didn't realize when I chose to catch up with them, they had an aggressive interest in adolescent boys and sex acts. And what they didn't realize when they chose to catch up with me was that violence was my comfort zone. It was how I responded to any perceived threat. It was something that I had, developed as a habit over my life, as a way of responding to any situation. It was something that was really seen and valued amongst my peer group. And I always wanted to be accepted and respected and belong. So I had, over those years, really honed my skills in terms of my fighting capability, my capacity for violence. And as a result of the choices that were made that day for both of us, we ended up in places that neither of us would have predicted or wanted to be. He ended up dead. And before the day was out, I was in a New Zealand prison, and I was about to spend from 18 to 29 years of age in prison for having unnecessarily ended his life. And had I been the person who had died that day, people would have done to me exactly what they did to him, and that was to go, good riddance to bad rubbish. One criminal kills another criminal, but I have been so fortunate that I have had the opportunity in my life to realize I was on the wrong path. And as a result of that, to change my direction and change my behavior. And it was education that enabled me to do that. Education I started to receive in prison. The original word for educate, the original Greek word means to lead out of the darkness of our own ignorance. And that's what it would do for me. I went to prison as a high school dropout. I never felt any connection with education. I'd been held back a year at school when I was in primary school, when I was young. Never saw myself as someone who was academically capable at all. And when I was in prison, I had the opportunity through encouragement and support to actually pursue education. And I started out studying a couple of papers in psychology. And I didn't start with any intention of doing a degree. That would have seemed way beyond me. And I wouldn't have even studied at university level if anyone else had offered psychology from a distance. But the only place that did was Massey University in New Zealand. And so I enrolled in a couple of papers, no intention to do a degree, and I could enroll in those because I was over 20. So I didn't need university entrance or anything like that from school, because I certainly didn't have that. And I started studying those because I thought they would be really useful. I started studying psychology because I thought it would make me like a mind reader, which would be incredibly valuable as a skill to have. 3 psych degrees later, I haven't come across anything that cool. But of course, what happened when I started studying psychology to understand the world out there is that spotlight turned within, and it was myself I started to understand. And I started to learn about the normality of unpleasant emotions, the realities of stress, but also the healthy and effective tools that we could use that would help us navigate the path forward towards a meaningful, satisfying life while making space for that stuff, not being derailed by it, and being really able to boost the more pleasant emotional experiences we'd have as well. And I've got to say, I learned some really valuable lessons in prison that I look at now and I go, okay, that was stuff that I now understand the research around and why that helped me. For example, one of the things that was really helpful to me is that when I was in prison in my early years, and I'd get in a lot of trouble for continuing to do drugs in prison. Now, don't be surprised that you can do drugs in prison. Prison's full of drug addicts and drug dealers. Of course, there's going to be drugs in prison. However, if you get caught in New Zealand prisons doing drugs or suspected of it, then what you do is you end up in solitary confinement. And over the length of my sentence, I spent about 10 months in solitary confinement, which is an interesting punishment because it's one intended to break you into submission, to be so bad you won't repeat it. And there's lots of research around the negative mental health impacts of solitary confinement. But I actually came out of solitary confinement stronger than before I went in. And the reason was this. When I went in solitary confinement, my attitude was, come at me. I'll take whatever you've got. I will not allow you to break me. Now, that wasn't a pro-social attitude at the time, but what I now understand of the neuroscience is what I said to you before, and that is when we see stress as a challenge to be embraced, it activates a different part of our brain. It releases the dopamine required to have motivation and grit and perseverance to see it as an opportunity for an accomplishment, something meaningful. Whereas if I had just seen this as a terrible thing I had to endure, then it would have been all of that cortisol, all of that amygdala, all of that stuff, which would have likely resulted in negative health outcomes. I can't emphasize this enough. You've signed up to do stuff that matters. You do it every day. You do stuff that can impact people's lives in such a profound sense, and that involves stress. But that stress is a challenge to be embraced. It's not a threat to be avoided. It's not something you're not supposed to have. And we need to understand that. And also, it wasn't just solitary confinement as well, which illustrated this stuff for me. When I was in maximum security prison, as soon as I turned 20, I was put in the toughest maximum security block in New Zealand. And geez, that was a learning experience. As my parents' generation would have said, a character building experience, right? I tell you this right now, I am a true believer that sometimes when you're in dark places, it feels like you've been buried when actually you've been planted. I love that quote, because that's what it was for me. It was terrible at the time, but I don't regret having had the experience because it made me who I am today. And today I'm someone who can try and have a positive impact on others, reduce the likelihood that other people will follow in my footsteps, and try and help people thrive in their lives more broadly. And one of the things I learned when I was in maximum security prison, because that's where I started studying, is I learned the value of literature and reading. Outside of my formal education that I was pursuing there, I used to borrow books and be given books by my dad. And the favorite books for me to read were ones about way worse prisons to be in, because it gave me a sense of perspective and made me grateful for my situation, even though it was incredibly hard. Even though I spent each day waiting to get attacked. I was attacked by a gang member once in the yard with a weight bar. I consider myself incredibly lucky to have survived the whole experience of maximum security prison. It's so horrendous. But even within that environment, I could still find things to be grateful for, even if I was thinking about how much worse things could be. And that's one of the techniques that we know that can really boost our general sense of happiness and well-being. And a lot of us have heard of practices around this, like gratitude diaries, gratitude journals. But what a lot of us don't know is that the idea of doing a gratitude journal is not that you get an immediate return on investment. Let me give you an example. The research out of the Harvard Happiness Lab suggests that you need to do this for 21 days. The way you do every day is you go, what are 3 small and different things from the last 24 hours that were good, that I'm grateful for? But what most people do is they don't realize you have to do it over a longer period of time. And so they just do it a little bit. Oh, I'm grateful for the nice weather this afternoon. Oh, I'm grateful for the cup of tea that my colleague offered to make me. Oh, I'm grateful that I got a seat on the bus. And then they go, I don't feel massively uplifted, so they don't carry on. But what you need to realize is this stuff is like going to the gym for your brain. That's this whole mental fitness concept, right? It's like physical fitness. The work you do now is an investment in your future self. And what we know from that research out of the Harvard Happiness Lab is for the vast majority of people, you do this for 21 days, you notice a significant increase in your general sense of happiness and well-being because you'll have more serotonin in your system. And the reason you'll have more is not from when you're doing the exercise, but because what you start doing is being more present and paying more attention to those small good things as they happen. And boom, that's when the serotonin goes off in your brain, when you notice it as it happens. But so much of the time, we're just walking around blind to those little good things that are going on a daily basis and focusing on the things we're worried about. The things that have gone on in our interpretation of, or the milk that we might spill if we buy it, the things in the future we're worried about that haven't even happened. But if we could actually just cultivate more of a sense of being present, being where our feet are, that's a good bit of advice, be where your feet are, then we would catch more of those small good things as they happen. So the gratitude diary is just to recalibrate your radar and make you more present to those things. And you need to, because we have 3 to 4 times as many brain cells devoted to threat detection and unpleasant emotions, devoted to the things we worry about, the things we regret. But as you know, educators, Neural plasticity. We have this miraculous thing, this mind-blowing thing that enables us to change our brain based on how we exercise it. And that gratitude exercise, that helps strengthen the neural pathways associated with noticing and benefiting from the good stuff. So I didn't know all this research when I was in Maxi, but I knew that I could feel grateful for my situation as a result of being able to compare down and go, things could be worse. And I tell you what, I wouldn't be here today. I wouldn't have been able to do anything that I've done to get me here if it wasn't for massive amounts of support and opportunity from other people. One of the things I was asking before is, how heavy is this? I'll tell you this right now, it's a lot less heavy when there are multiple hands holding it. When it's just us alone, we carry all that weight. But when we have social support and connection, it's like having multiple hands on the glass, helping carry that. And in fact, I love this idea as a metaphor. I heard it recently about how, in relationships, and this was oriented towards, intimate romantic relationships, but I think it's true of relationships in general with colleagues and others. We're all carrying a yoke, with water buckets on either side. We're carrying this along. And at different points, one person in the relationship won't be able to carry all their water, and it will be the other person's job to pick up a bit of an extra load for that period. But who can't carry their water and who needs to carry extra water? That'll shift and change at different points in relationships. And that's a very useful thing to be aware of as well. You're not always going to be able to hold out the same amount, but the more hands involved, the easier it will be to carry the load. And so I benefited massively from that support and opportunity. In fact, it's the biggest difference between me and most people in prison. My dad, he was never into any of the modern approaches to parenting, like cuddles or I love you or anything like that. But I'll tell you this right now, my father visited me nearly every weekend for over 10 years. When I was ready to try and change my life, he paid for my study out of his pension. That's the only reason I could study. And he also helped me find ways to study, ways to work even within the confines of the prison environment. When I first decided I wanted to study, I spent about a little under a year going around asking people for permission. Can I study? I want to study. I want to do something positive. No one would say yes, because no one gets in trouble for saying no. But if you say yes to something unusual, then you now put your neck on the line. And so what I could have done is I could have gone, no one will help me. I just need to wait until my circumstances are better. But instead, what I did is I said, well, what can I do? What's in my control right now? And by the way, this ability to focus on what's in our control right now to try and improve our future, what are the small steps we can take right now? This is crucial to thriving in life, whatever your circumstances. And so I said to Dad once when he visited me, I said, look, can you just enroll me through Massey? Because I bet you what will happen is when the study materials arrive at the prison, whoever's been rostered onto the receiving office that day will look at them and go, oh, must have permission for that, and let it through. And that's exactly what happened. I was the first person in New Zealand prison to go through an undergraduate and master's degree from having been a high school dropout. And I was 2 years into my doctorate before I was released. And no one had ever actually given me permission to study. But I just saw such obstacles as problem-solving opportunities, and I was focused on the steps I could take, and I leveraged the support that was available to me. Massey University bent over backwards so I could study from a distance. They changed the rules so that I could do all of my master's degree as a special topic student without ever having attended, without ever having set foot on university soil. And then when it came to my doctorate, they said, there's no way we can do that without face-to-face meetings with your supervisors. And my two supervisors traveled hours out of their way to visit me in the prison in their own time. When I talk to you about having a debt of gratitude towards education, to have education change my life, it's not just an abstract thing. It was the educators themselves and what they did for me and the social support they provided, bending over backwards to make it possible for me, that got me from where I was to where I am right now. Now, you have to do the work for yourself. No one else can do it for you. But without that level of support and opportunity, I would not be standing here today. And one of the things that I have learned and that really helps me stay focused, that was important to me transitioning from being a drug addicted high school dropout prisoner to being the person I am today, where I try to give back, where I try to make a positive difference, and I certainly try to live the best life I can, pursue my potential. And that is, my goal is not being good. My goal is not to compare myself to anyone else. My goal is getting incrementally better. That's my goal. And when your goal has been good, you do tend to compare yourself to others. Oh, where am I at compared to my neighbor or compared to my colleague? But when your goal is getting better, your only measure of progress and success is, who was I yesterday and who am I going to be tomorrow? And as long as tomorrow's version of you is just a little bit better than yesterday's, just that incrementally little bit better than yesterday, that's what it really means to be on the path. And I'll tell you this right now, I mentioned to you those 3 things in terms of gratitude diaries. I actually do 5 things every day. I've done this for a long time now. And the additional 2 things, I do the 3 things, just general good things every day. But I also do 1 thing every day, which is something I'm proud of about myself. In the last 24 hours, what's a decision I've made that I'm proud of, that is consistent with who I want to grow into as a person, which is consistent with me continuing to get better. And maybe it's a value I lived into. Maybe I took ownership and decided that it was up to me to try and make things better rather than to go and, sulk or complain about someone else. Or maybe it was something as simple as I didn't eat a whole packet of chocolate biscuits in the evening, even though I really wanted to. But what I'm doing is I'm gathering evidence on a daily basis of who I can be at my best. And that helps keep me on the path and motivated towards becoming a better version of myself than yesterday. Just those small incremental steps. And the cool thing about having the goal of getting better rather than being good is it gives you the growth mindset when it comes to your failures. I regularly fail to be who I want to be as a parent, as a husband, and all these other roles that are crucial to me. I don't live up to my own expectations and standards, but that's okay because those are my opportunities to learn and grow and get better. And I also feel a far greater sense of control over my life as a result of that focus on small incremental improvement on a daily basis. And also as well, I feel a far greater sense that I will be prepared to take on whatever comes my way and not to slip into the types of behaviors or mistakes I made previously. Now, just as an aside, the other thing that I do, because I mentioned there's 3 general things, and I do 1 thing, which is gathering evidence about who I can be at my best, focusing on getting better. The other thing I do, the 5th thing, is what's 1 thing from the last 24 hours that I'm grateful for about my wife. Now, this will be unrelatable for any of you who have been in long-term relationships, but it's very easy to start to take people for granted a little bit, to lose sight of all those fantastic things that they bring to a relationship for you, that they do for you, that they bring to the table, and to start to focus on, some of the annoying stuff. I tell you this right now, incorporating a gratitude for my wife each 24 hours has radically transformed my sense of appreciation for her since I started doing it. And of course, that has a positive impact on her experience of me as well. So, look, it's been so great to have the opportunity to talk to you. It is just about time for Jared to take over again. Key messages: the stress is enhancing mindset. Stress is not a threat to be avoided, it is a challenge to be embraced. But that will only be true if you are deliberate and disciplined about putting the glass down, getting that opportunity to recover. One of the techniques that I talked to you about there was that physiological sigh, which is a really good way of just doing a micro reset. You'll have other things you do in your life that put the glass down for you, that enable you to just have a little bit of a break, a bit of emotional reset, where you come away feeling a little bit better. I also spoke to you about the importance of a gratitude practice, of deliberately giving yourself that appreciation and those boosts in serotonin that enable you to feel better as you are on that journey. Also, as well, I just wanted to reiterate the importance of our networks, our connections, and our social support. Having other people who can help take the weight of that water. And just again, to reiterate, the life changes you are for people. And there might be other people who do life-changing things in their roles, but again, for educators, you've got that additional burden of having eyes on you so much of the time that you're under so much pressure to bring your A game compared to most people, but also as well, you don't get to see the fruits of your labor as much. So I just want to really express my appreciation for having your time and this opportunity. And what we'll do, Jared, you'll step back in, take over, share the updates, and I'm going to ask that people use the Q&A or the chat feed in order to put in any questions, comments, or reflections that I can address then once you've done that. Sound good, Jared?
Correct. Thanks, Paul. That's terrific. So while we give Paul a little break and a chance to peruse those questions and for you to keep entering them, I'll just give you a little overview of what Matific is, if you're not familiar with it, and in particular, an update with the new things that are coming out with Matific. So then we'll come back to Paul and he'll respond to some of those questions. So if you're not familiar with Matific, let's just pop this down here. Game-based platform. So it's very much about, maths is the game. We're about children loving maths and enjoying maths, not seeing it as something to be avoided. We have it aligned to the various curricula around the world. And if you use the Oxford University Press programs in Australia and New Zealand, possibly too in South Africa, we have an alignment to those as well. So you can look for activities for the students to consolidate the concepts that you're being teaching in your lessons. We use AI a lot, so activities can be auto-assigned from plans, from you setting your teaching focus and the learning level of the students. So it takes the burden off you of having to manually go in and do all that work, but still being able to personalize the learning for the students. And we have more coming out this year in that area of personalization. And of course, there's all sorts of reports. The nice thing to me is it's not about the students having to have some huge anxiety-inducing point-in-time test. They have fun doing Matific. They love the activities. They beg their teachers to do it. And in the background, you're getting the information you need on how the children are mastering concepts and where they're having some sort of difficulties. So some of the new features, just to have things of relevance to people. Some of these are new as in late last year, but you may not have discovered them yet. And others are new this term. And then when we do our next webinar, I'll include some of the things that are coming in the next quarter of the year. So now teachers can set their focus topic, and that means that you can not only have students being assigned activities automatically at their learning level, but on the topic you're teaching. So you can say, I choose a year 6 topic for my class, but a child in your class who's operating at year 2 level for mathematics will get activities at year 2 level on that topic, personalized for them, rather than year 6 activities, which are beyond their proximal zone of development. All sorts of reports. We've always had reports on the students' achievement and completion, but not sort of the diagnostic data that people really want. So now there are reports where the activities are feeding into the background, and you can look and see who's coming along at beginning, middle, or end of the year level, but also who's struggling behind and who's also ahead, so that you can go in and click on these circles and it'll show you who those 3 students are, then the circle, and then you can go in and look at who do I need to give particular assistance to. Similarly, we have a student mastery report, and that student mastery report is quite simple. The circles, or donuts as some teachers call them, turn green as students show evidence of mastering a concept, and yellow where they're attempting work in that area but experiencing some difficulties. They remain grey if we don't have sufficient data. Generally, they need to have completed 10 activities relevant to a concept before we start making judgments about their performance. What we can do if you're a school leader or administrator of the Matific account, in the dashboard, you can also view similar sorts of reports, but across the whole school. And so you can get that visibility of how your students are going on a school level. One of the features we just released recently that's enhanced.
We can't hear you, Duran. You're on mute. You're on mute. Please unmute yourself.
us to come along the way with muting there. Sorry. So back to start from here. The Star Master is where the students can actually see who's earned the most stars for their activities that they've done this week. They get a star for each correct question. And basically, it's a little bit of fun in the class where they can bump each other off. And again, the students are achieving at their level. So it doesn't have to be the best student who's getting the accolades here. The student who's coming first might be in grade 6, but doing grade 2 activities because that's the appropriate type of activities for them. And this is reset every week. And then later in the year, we're going to have further enhancements to that particular feature. Multiplayer activities. This is one of the features that should be coming out within the next month. We already have, and it's probably the student's favorite part of Mativic, where they can play the games as a competition. But what this adds is that there will be games where they can actually have more interaction with the other player. So it's not just I'm completing the activity on my own and someone else is, and then we see at the end who won, but we actually take turns like you do in a cards game. And we can make strategic decisions, that will answer a certain question to block our opponent. And this is particularly aimed at the older kids who like that sort of social interaction and learning, where we're trying to be more reflective of different learning styles at different ages. And then one of the features teachers have been asking for is to not just get reports on the activities and the concepts overall, but to actually see the particular questions that the students got right and wrong, so teachers can really focus in on those particular points. So that's another one that's coming out very soon. I said earlier, we're going to have more on personalization. There are features now, but much more where a teacher will be able to quite easily see who didn't do well on activity and very easily know that they've reassigned them that activity so they can attempt it again. All the activities in Mativic have randomized questions, so they can do the same activity, but with different questions. So it's not a case of, I've done this before. Alrighty, Paul, you've had enough time that I can throw back to you for answering some of those questions. Just unmute yourself now, don't do my trick. Our wives like to be able to mute us.
Oh my God, honestly,
we want to hear you.
We're the tech guys. Hey, if you have tech questions, clearly come to us. Hey, we'll give you a muted answer. Hey, I've responded to a few in there, but there's some really, really interesting questions. I won't get through it all. One of the questions was around the difference between intrinsic and extrinsic motivation for students or teachers that Jen asked. That's a really good one. I always think that there's a MAP when it comes to motivation, and MAP is an acronym that stands for Mastery, Autonomy, and Purpose. The pursuit of mastery and feeling that we're building competence in something is intrinsically motivating. We know this. For me, actually succeeding at something when I started learning became this idea that, I can get better, I can improve at something, and that built so much motivation. But I actually think the one that we often miss ourselves is the purpose bit. What's the why of this? Why are you here? Why does this matter? Why is this important to you? And there's an old Nietzsche quote, which is, if you've got a why, you can bear almost any how. But we also know from the research into, who succeeds and makes it through very difficult challenges like getting into the special forces, that it's the people who have a very clear sense of why they're doing this. And I think in the day-to-day struggles of our lives, it's easy to lose sight of that. So I'd say for you as educators and teachers, reminding yourself, hey, why do I do this? Why don't I go do something easier? Why am I here? What's the impact I'm trying to make as a person? And having that front of mind will help you be less negatively impacted by everything else that goes on and to carry on. But it's also a really good one to explore with students, of course. The why of what we're doing. What's the benefit of this? What's the purpose of this? What will this enable you to do? Really getting onto that purpose piece. And there's different ways to approach that. The autonomy, of course, depends on the age of the people, but trying to encourage autonomy and choice, of course, is an intrinsically engaging thing as well. How do you become more resilient when dealing with conflict? And the stress around it is not all personalities work well together, and this can often cause prolonged stress when dealing with it for everyone every day. Yeah, absolutely. And I'll tell you something interesting too. Often the people we find most stressful to be around are people who actually don't get as stressed themselves, and they can be a bit emotionally obtuse. Let me give you an example. a lot of you will be people who are at risk of compassion fatigue or empathy fatigue, right? Because you care about people, you're focused on people, and then you'll come across other people at work who don't seem to care at all. And they just cause more stress for you, but actually they don't get stressed out because their sensitivity to other people's stress and emotions is lower. So they're fine, but they're really unhelpful to be around. And I think it can be incredibly useful to remind ourselves that people who cause us stress and pressure, it's not that there's something wrong with them. It's just that they've had life experiences that have led them to this place where this is how they respond to others and this is how they engage with the world. And that's using that trauma-informed approach. So instead of going, what's wrong with you? Going, what's happened to you that this is how you behave and respond as a colleague or as an individual? And what that does is it just helps reduce the amount of impact they have on you, and it helps shift you more from judgment to compassion. And that doesn't mean that, they're not annoying, but if you think there's something mentally wrong with them, or you think they should be behaving in a certain way and they're not, the unmet expectation around that will mean that they impact you more than if you're able to go, hey, this is about who they are based on the experiences they've had, and they can't have been good ones. If this is how they behave, they must have had some difficult or challenging experiences or lacked the learning and guidance that would have been useful for them. And so I can feel a little bit compassionate there. But also as well, stop using those shoulds. That's one of the most common self-defeating and distorted beliefs. When you say should about other people, like, oh, they should have done this, they should do that, or even about yourself, oh, I should have done it this way, I should be doing it this well. What we say in psychology is every time you use the word should, you're shoulding all over yourself and other people. You're talking about some ideal world where everything complies with your preferences and expectations. Try and get rid of that word should and start going, I would prefer it if they responded better. I would prefer it if they were more positive to be around. I would prefer it if whatever it is. Or if it's you, I would have preferred it if I had handled this more effectively. That shift from should to preference massively reduces the intensity of the emotional experience. So what I would say is the work always rests with you. It really does. You want to make the biggest change for yourself in terms of your experience of your ability to thrive. It's always with you. Charity starts at home. And through that, you will be less impacted by other people and you'll actually more positively influence them as well. Okay, let's see. What else have we got? Okay. Energy depleted. It's not easy being calm in what feels like a raging storm with 4-year-olds. Oh my golly, Michelle. Oh my golly. Honestly, I can't believe people like yourself who work in early childhood education. My level of patience for it would be so minimal. I think you do an amazing job. And I tell you this right now, one of the things we know is no one can bring their A game all the time. No one's always bringing the best version of themselves. But one of the things that we can get better at is just recognizing, hey, what do I notice? And what are the common ingredients that tend to happen in situations where I am starting to struggle? One of the cool things about the online mental fitness course that you're getting a discount code for is it's got a whole lot of stuff in there, which is on the mental skills used in the special forces and amongst professional athletes. And one of the things I talk about there is the model that's used in order to predict and then mitigate the emotions experienced in challenging circumstances. Because what you'll find is that most of the time, these are things that repeat themselves, and yet we continue to be surprised by them each time they happen. Whereas if we could be more strategic and go, hey, what are the situations that we encounter where we do tend to have a stronger stress response? What's going on there? What's the ingredients? Okay. What are our reactions? What do we notice when we're not performing at our best in those circumstances? And then what can we try? What's an action we can take to try and mitigate the impact of it, how intense the emotions are, but also what we do in that situation? What's the strategy we can use? And again, the physiological sigh is an example of that strategy, that okay, I know on this day of the week or at this period when I haven't had sleep, then this is the situation where I'm more likely to experience high levels of stress and not react as well. And what are some of the signs and indicators that that's starting to happen? Maybe the strategy I use is to give myself time out for 5 minutes, to just quickly go to the bathroom, do a few physiological sighs, do a reset, splash water over my face, whatever it is. But the more we can predict in advance the circumstances we'll encounter where we do struggle, the easier it will be to try and manage those effectively. But we really do have to cultivate that growth mindset that you're all familiar with and go, the goal here is learning. This is an experiment. There's no guarantees that I'll do this better. But if I can reflect on it afterwards and go, well, what did I notice? What did work? What didn't? Then I can progressively get better at it. And remember, that's the goal. The goal is getting better at this stuff, not being good at it all the time. Yes, setting boundaries. I'll tell you this right now. This is a really good one, anonymous attendee. Sometimes when we have to push back with people, when we have to say no, that makes us unpopular, right? Because people don't want us to say no and push back to establish those boundaries. But I'll tell you this right now, that little bit of popularity you temporarily lose, you exchange that for long-term respect. People who are good people and want to be good people, and that is the vast majority of us, when someone pushes back and says, no, I won't actually stay late and do that work. No, I won't take on that additional task. When they establish boundaries, what we do is we feel a little bit like, oh, but I would say yes to that. Why aren't you? But very quickly that shifts to going, I wish I was better at boundaries like that. And you will often hear that. The people you say no to and people you push back on will be people who will actually come to you, maybe an hour later, maybe a day later, and go, actually, I wish I was better at doing that. We all need to work on boundaries. And the people who don't appreciate you pushing back at all, who don't have respect for you establishing those boundaries, those are the people who you really want to have boundaries with, because those are the exploitative people who will just burn you out given half the opportunity. And we have to do things which are safe for ourselves in terms of our values and our capacity to cope and live a good life. And that means appropriate self-assertion. Exchange that short-term popularity for longer-term respect, anonymous person. Okay. All right. What do we got? Oh, gosh, so much. I really appreciate all the positive comments. Okay. Perseverance, ability to face the unknown, the aha moment of a student experience when student attempts an unknown word problem. I mean, it's just pure gold, isn't it? It's pure gold. And maths is such a good example. I so agree with you, because maths isn't supposed to be easy, eh? One of the things that I learned from a good friend of mine who helped mentor me through the maths I had to learn to be able to do for my PhD, and it was way beyond me because I didn't do any secondary school maths, right? So I had this massive jump. What he told me is, he said, what people do is they think they're supposed to be able to look at it and solve it straight away. And when they can't, they just quit. But what you need to do is persevere and work slowly. It's not supposed to be easy or quick. And when he told me that, it radically transformed my experience. One of the biggest messages I have for people is life's not supposed to be easy. Life will be full of challenge and difficulty and misery and suffering. That's okay. The meaningful, satisfying life is one where we pursue living our values more deliberately, growing into the person. We want our reputation to reflect positively impacting others and getting better at coping with the challenges we encounter without being derailed by them. What was the old Bruce Lee quote? Do not pray for an easy life, pray for the strength to endure a difficult life. Like maths. So agree. Recording, yes.
Last one, Paul.
Okay,
Probably
last
have to
one.
be the last one.
Yeah, what do we got? Okay. Can I just say one more thing? In fact, look, I'm just going to give you a closing note in terms of a really important thought. The reason I was able to get from drug addicted, high school dropout, in prison to where I am now is because I just focused on taking small steps that would lead me in a direction I never predicted, that would lead me such a long way over time. The stuff we do now, the small tweaks we make in our lives now make big differences over time. focus on small things that you can take away from this session and you can start doing, but also focus on doing some of the stuff you already know would be good for you, but you're not currently doing, and do it in small ways. We all know the quote, Rome wasn't built in a day, but very few of us know that the full quote is this: Rome wasn't built in a day, but bricks were laid every hour. Go lay some bricks.
Well, thank you, Paul. That's been terrific. There's so many things I could finish commenting on, but too many to say. But you made me reach for a couple of little things I have in front of me on my computer. I've got a little badge that says I love maths. And, I didn't always. So in fact, I was very much more an English literacy person, and people sometimes say, how'd you end up now in this maths job? Yeah, that why, my why, whether I've been a teacher, a consultant, and working with resource companies, has always been about improving education for students. And the other little one I've got here was given to me when I worked with Sean Gordon, who's an OAM and a great speaker like yourself. And I did a course, and Sean is a mentor, and it has on one side react and you lose control, and on the other side respond and you're in control. And it was very much that sort of message. I think yours is an amazing redemption story, and it just shows that as teachers, one of my colleagues used to say, they're rough little stones, but we polish them into beautiful gems. And I know I once taught a little fiery redhead boy like you, who was one of my more challenging students ever taught. And now he services my car and does a great job managing the place where that all happens. And it was a matter of, looking and seeing where's the potential in this boy. And as I say, look with curiosity, not animosity, when they misbehave. Few little housekeeping things for us to finish up on. So we've got a special offer with Paul's books, which I can recommend. I've read both of them and highlighted bits and underlined bits. So this one won't help you with how to physically escape from prison if you're going to end up there, but very cleverly named, and some amazing stories there that really, Paul, puts you in his shoes of what it was like to be in prison, but also what he learned while he was in prison. And then more relevant, I suppose, even particularly to today's book and today's session, the one I highlighted more, the one which is about developing your mental fitness. So that QR code will also come out to you in an email. So don't worry if you can't get time now to scan it. But if you're a primary school teacher in Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa, if you scan that and book a 20-minute online demonstration of Matific, the first 10 people will give a free copy of whichever one of those books of Paul's that you would like to acquire. And then, yes, we've had a lot of questions. There will be certificates of attendance. You don't need to email for them, but we'll automatically send you next week an email. It will have your certificate, it will have the recording, it will have the QR code for the offer for the books, and it'll also have the information about how you can take advantage of Paul's special offer to do his online course, where he's offering a special discount by using the code Matific. But also keep in mind, you've seen now just a little bit of what Paul's got to offer. If you're someone on a committee attending conferences and so on, then keep Paul in mind for your conferences to be a keynote speaker and a workshop facilitator. So I might just finish with a little quote that came to mind that you probably know, Paul, but it says, two people looked out through bars, one saw mud, the other stars. And obviously Paul is someone who looked out through those bars and did an amazing transformation job in his life. And now not just he and his family and friends, but all of us are the beneficiaries of that. So thank you very much for what you've shared with us all today, Paul, and thank you everyone else for attending.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I so appreciated everyone's time. Keep doing stuff that matters. Oh, fantastic.
Well, we'll let you get to the other part of your life that matters, and that's a little 7-year-old and 10-year-old probably waiting to say goodnight, Dad.
Put to bed, so I'll go and do that. Thanks so much.
Okay, thank you very much. Bye-bye.